Top 10 most shocking WrestleMania match outcomes. We've only got 2 more left. We are in the home stretch. And number 2 in our countdown takes us back to probably the greatest top to bottom WrestleMania of all time. WrestleMania 17. From the Astrodome in Houston, Texas, April 1st, 2001. Stone Cold Steve Austin back in Texas, back home in the great state of Texas, challenging for the WWF title against his second greatest rival, second only to Vince McMahon, and that is The Rock. So what makes this the greatest WrestleMania of all time? It was the culmination in a lot of ways, the climax, the peak of the Attitude Era. The most popular era in the history of the company. You want drama? This show had drama. You want action? This show had action. You want great matches? This show had some of those too. You want comic relief and nostalgia? They gave that to you in the Gimmick Battle Royal. Maybe the best, worst match I've ever seen. Right down to the commentary from Mean Gene Okerlund and Bobby the Brain Heenan. This was also the only WrestleMania to ever have commentary from the team of Jim Ross and Paul Heyman. This was right after Jerry Lawler had quit in protest of them releasing his wife, the cat. JR and Heyman were a great pair. It had the first meeting on pay-per-view ever between Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit. The start of that great feud. It had, in my opinion, still to this day, the greatest TLC match of all the ones they've ever done, TLC 2, with Edge and Christian, the Hardys, and the Dudleys. And that incredible mid-air spear from Edge to Jeff Hardy. There was a fun street fight between Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon. That great moment where Zombie Linda McMahon, rises from her chair to kick her husband in the dick. Which, you laugh, but this got a bigger reaction than almost anyone on the current roster. Anything that they've done in the last 12 months. Because they told a story. And they paid it off here in a way that people wanted to see it get paid off for weeks. Linda was in a comatose state sitting in a wheelchair while her husband made out and swapped spit with Trish Stratus. Lucky guy, right? And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and how he just completely disrespected his wife right in front of her face. This was after, I think, he had asked her for a divorce. I think this was after he asked her for a divorce, unless that came later on, but maybe that did come later. But it all built up to this one great moment where he physically put his wife in a chair in the corner of the ring and said, "Watch this, I'm going to kick our son's ass." And as soon as he turned his back, Linda rose up, and you could see they had that wide shot of the crowd. And everybody stood up, and Vince turned around, spread his legs out, and then boom! And the place just, you would think Hogan slammed Andre again. The place went nuts. It was such a great moment. We also had Undertaker against Triple H. This is their forgotten WrestleMania match, but also, I think, maybe their best one. This might still be my favorite of all the WrestleMania matches, the 3, that these guys had. I think it's between this and the one from 27. I was not as much of a fan as some of you were of that Hell in a Cell end of an era stuff at 28. I was there for that. It was my first WrestleMania in person. It was good, but yeah, not as good as these other matches the two of them had. I love that sledgehammer tease where Undertaker had him up for the last ride, even though there was a 10-minute ref bump. Referee was down for about 10 minutes off one bump. But he had him up for the last ride, and Triple H had grabbed the sledgehammer before he got hoisted up. And so he lifted up the sledgehammer and boom, right down into the head of the Undertaker, knocked him out. Did the slow crawl. The referee had to do the slow crawl to count. It was just a near fall. It was just great. Great moment. Great match. And then there's the main event. The second such WrestleMania main event between Stone Cold and The Rock. Going back and watching this, the video and the match itself, I really don't think that it can... I hate to be a Debbie Downer here, but I really don't think it could ever be as good wrestling again as it was here. It just can't be. Not the way they do things now. I mean, we're talking WWE. We're not talking all the other wrestling out there. It can't be that way ever again. Wrestling can still be fun, but it can never be what it was back then in WWE during that era. It was a different business. It was a different company. The company's a lot bigger now. They have sponsors to answer to, and just the way they do things, the way they write television, the way they book television, the formula, everything is so different now in a lot of ways than it was back then. It's like BC and AD when you look at the two different eras. And I feel bad for the newer fans who don't know of those times and think the way it is now is how it's always been. This is great. I mean, I'm glad they enjoyed themselves. But, even going to the network and watching all of the old shows, if you just kind of bring them up on the WWE network, it's not the same. If you didn't live through it, you had to have lived through it to truly appreciate it. So we had this Austin-Rock rivalry that had been built up now for a number of years, one of the greatest of all time. I said before, Rock is second only to Vince McMahon as Austin's greatest foe. For years, Vince McMahon would try to make Stone Cold's life a living hell. The success that this company enjoyed in the late 90s was largely built on the back of Austin versus McMahon. Austin was the perfect foil for Vince McMahon. I mean, who among us doesn't have the urge sometimes at least to go beat up your boss, right? That's how that whole feud, that's what it was predicated on. People were living through Austin every week. They got a kick out of watching him come out and kick Vince in the nuts or jump off a Zamboni or hose him down in beer. All the different things that this guy got his boss arrested and pour beer on his head. All the different things that he did to this guy. You never knew from one week to the next what you were going to get. It was fun. It was unpredictable. And they just struck gold between the two of them. But the idea that Austin and Vince McMahon could be friends, it just didn't feel right to even think about it. There were moments like that over the years where Vince would go babyface for a while, but, in the end, he'd end up screwing over Austin anyway. But then in 99, Austin had to go have neck surgery done. His neck injury caught up with him, going back to the pile driver from Owen Hart. He was never really the same after that. He had to change his whole style, the way he wrestled, the bumps that he took and the bumps that he didn't take. It all caught up with him. And he had to go have neck surgery. He was out for almost a year. Really, he only missed about 9 or 10 months. But after that, the protocol for that surgery seemed to be, you will not be cleared anywhere before 12 months. And maybe that was because Austin came back. Maybe he had some lingering issues and they learned from that. I don't know. But he was gone almost a year. And Austin was the biggest star, not just in the company, but in the wrestling business at that time. This was the top of the line guy. This would be like Hogan going down with neck surgery in '86. That's how big of a deal this was. Thankfully for WWE, they had a backup plan. They had done a good job of building up more than just Austin. They were very fortunate to have an Austin and a Rock at the same exact time. Who has that? What would be the Austin-Rock combo right now in WWE? There is none. They don't exist. They had the luxury of having these two ultra-popular babyfaces. So when one went down, the other could kind of fill the role and pick up the slack. And they had Triple H, who they had started building, a year earlier, basically, or more than a year earlier, as a top heel in the company. And in the year 2000, it was Rock and Triple H largely who carried that company on their backs and were the featured top performers. And they were fortunate that they had a great supporting cast there to help them. It wasn't just Rock and Triple H. You had Undertaker, Kurt Angle, Rikishi, and Too Cool. They had a lot of very popular acts in the company at that time. They were very fortunate. The Radicals came in from WCW. That helped. But in the time that he was away, Austin did make an appearance. He helped Rock win the title of Backlash in 2000. He shared a beer with him at the end of that match. And I remember even then there were rumors that maybe Austin might turn on Rock, watch Stone Cold, let's see what happens here. And I kind of expected him when he was, doing the whole cheers thing with Rock and the beer, that he was going to kick him in the gut and give him a stunner. Although I think with his neck in the state that it was in, he was only 3 or 4 months into his recovery. This was when he walked out and everybody said, oh, Stone Cold got fat. Yeah, he got fat because he just had neck surgery, you freaking knuckle-dragging fool. Like, what do you expect him to do? Be lifting 100-pound weights at the gym? So I don't think he could even hit a stunner. He mowed down 6 people with a steel chair. Couldn't even hit a stunner. But that was really the only time we saw him before he came back later on that fall. And then we had Austin's comeback story, right? He went after the guy who was responsible for running him down, first Rikishi and then Triple H, and then came the Royal Rumble. And he won his 3rd Royal Rumble match, the first and still only to this day person to do that. Rock, in the meantime, at the No Way Out pay-per-view in February, beat Kurt Angle to win back the WWF title that Kurt had beaten him 4 months earlier. And on that same show, Austin, who's already punched his ticket to WrestleMania, he lost a 3 stages of hell match to Triple H. And poor Austin got hit in the head with a beer can when the match was over. If you go back and watch, these guys are laying on top of each other, just dead. The match is over. All of a sudden, you see this can come flying in. I don't know who threw this can, but this person had just perfect aim. And it hit Austin right in the head. And you could see Austin just flinched and knocked Triple H off of him. I think Austin even has talked about this before and said that it hurt like a bitch. But he lost. He lost that match to Triple H. Vince McMahon in the weeks leading up to WrestleMania trying to find every way to fuck the two of these guys over and turn them against each other. And he put Austin's wife, Deborah, with The Rock as The Rock's manager. So now it's the second to last Smackdown before WrestleMania. It's the sit-down interview backstage with Jim Ross interviewing The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. I need to beat you, Rock. I need more than anything that you could ever imagine. Those were Austin's words. The seeds were being planted. Then we had one of the greatest video build-up packages that this company has ever done. That was the video that was set to My Way by Limp Bizkit. Even if you don't like Limp Bizkit, you have to admit that song was pitch perfect for that video. Then we get to WrestleMania, the match itself. Going back again and watching it, it's an epic match. I mean, it really is everything you would want in a WrestleMania main event. And I was never the biggest fan of it when I was comparing it to like some of their other matches. I actually once said on the show, and I think people wanted to take my head off for it, that I liked their WrestleMania 15 match maybe even better than their WrestleMania 17 match, and might rank it above the WrestleMania 17 match. Now, I still like that match too. I go back though and I watch this, and it would be hard to rank anything above this, because this really, in a lot of ways, this was just the total package of what you would want to see out of a true WrestleMania main event. Two biggest names, 70,000 people, titles on the line, 2 babyfaces no less, although Rock wasn't much of one in Texas. This poor guy had back-to-back WrestleMania matches as a babyface where he was booed out of the building like a heel, through no fault of his own. But this was a war. That's what this match was. This match was a fucking war. And you could see, as the match went on, Austin just slowly descending into madness a little bit more each time. Every time Rock would kick out from a stunner, he would kick out from some other big move or a chair shot or something, because it was, no DQ. Austin would just slip a little bit more into madness. And that was the story they were telling. Austin said it himself. He needed to beat The Rock. He had to beat The Rock. There could be no other option here. Austin was losing his mind. He was desperate. He even busted out his old $1 million dream that he learned from Ted DiBiase. Dipping back into his old bag of tricks, doing everything he can to put Rock away, but nothing would work. And then down to the ring came Vince McMahon, sore testicles and all from what happened earlier in the night, sliding Austin a chair. What the hell's going on here? Why is he helping Stone Cold? More importantly, why is Austin accepting his help? And then we get to the whole finish where Austin is hitting Rock with a chair, Rock kicks out. Hits him with a chair, Rock kicks out. Finally, Austin just loses his shit. He obliterates The Rock, beats this guy to a bloody pulp with that chair about 10 times in a row, rolls him over, and pins him. And just like that, Austin is the champion, and the people sure didn't react like he was a heel. They exploded for the win. Remember, they are in Texas. Austin starts he's shaking hands with Satan himself. That was the legendary line from Jim Ross. One of many legendary lines that you can credit to Jim Ross. And by the way, his WWE contract just expired this week. He's likely on his way to All Elite Wrestling. But I think we should take a moment here and acknowledge the fact that the man spent 26 years of his life working for Vince McMahon, which can't be easy. Right? He may not be the Jim Ross of old anymore. He definitely isn't. But he is the greatest of all time. When it comes to play-by-play announcing in pro wrestling, there's nobody better than Jim Ross. And it's shocking turns and twists like this, I think, where he shined the most. Especially when Vince McMahon or somebody was screwing over somebody else. The way that JR would just lose his mind and lose his shit was great. And it really sold the story. It made it feel real. This guy was invested. It was like he was personally offended by what he was watching. You don't get that today. You really don't get that anymore. But the turn was shocking. They dropped all sorts of little hints, including adding the no disqualification stipulation, literally as the match was about to begin. Even Jim Ross was like, wait, no DQ? What's that about? That should have been a sign. But it was still shocking when it happened. This one moment, this one handshake, marked the end of the Attitude Era. It marked the end of everything that Stone Cold character represented. I remember hating it when it happened. But it did give us a lot of great comedic moments with Austin and Kurt Angle, or the time that Austin got thrown through a window on Smackdown backstage by The Undertaker. They strapped Austin to a gurney. He's got a big white bandage over his eye. And he just, as Vince and Triple H, I think, were there with him, they're wheeling him off, and he just keeps shouting, "My eye!" He goes, I didn't do nothing to that man, Vince. I don't know what his problem is. I didn't do nothing to that man. It was great. I enjoyed that. But turning Stone Cold was one of the worst decisions that company ever made. Austin himself says that he regrets he ever did it, and it was his idea. He thought he was flatlining a little bit as a babyface, getting a little stale. And he wanted to try something different. He was a heel at heart. He never wanted to be a babyface in the first place. But people just did not want to hate him. And by the end of the year, he was already back to being a babyface. Even before December, he was back to being a babyface. He says it is the worst call that he has ever made outside of refusing to job to Brock Lesnar on Raw the day that he took his ball and went home. He said he wishes he never did it. And instead, when he went to go shake Vince's hand, he would have kicked him and given him a stunner. He even thought about doing it. He thought about calling an audible and just doing it, and he didn't. Business-wise, this is where things began to decline. You could trace it right back to this heel turn. The ratings started to go down. There were certain other business indicators, I think, when it comes to tickets and pay-per-view that were not as strong as they were previously. You can track the decline back to this moment here. And I think also you have to include the death of WCW, which happened around the exact same time. WCW was, near its end anyway, at the end of its rope, but it still drew an audience every week, and they were still doing some business. And when WCW died, bigger than any heel turn, the worst thing that ever happened to wrestling was the death of WCW. But the combination of that and the Austin heel turn happening around the same time, that's what did business in. And business started to go down. They would kill today to get the kind of numbers ratings-wise they were doing then. But even still, things started to go down, and it was because of this. They turned Austin in Texas, knowing full well that Rock was leaving to go film a movie. And they had no other babyfaces on top for him to feud with other than Kane and The Undertaker. That was it. Triple H was apparently going to turn. They were going to turn him babyface. It made sense for him to do so because, remember, he had that win at No Way Out in the 3 Stages of Hell over Austin. He had the perfect case to make for wanting the next shot at the championship. He could have turned, and he decided he didn't want to. He wanted to team with Stone Cold. Very savvy move on his part. Because, he had to know that he wasn't taking the title away from Austin. Austin just won it. After a few months and losing to Austin, they'd move on to somebody else. Then what happens to me? What happens to Triple H? Better to team with the guy and glom some of that heat off of him. And then finally, a few months later, when it started to look like maybe they were going in the direction of a split between the two-man power trip, Triple H tore his quad. And he was gone for 9 months. Here's the other reason, though, before I wrap this up, that I hated this heel turn. Heel Stone Cold in 2001 also spawned the single worst chant in the history of the business. One that continues to infect WWE shows to this very day. And that is the What chant. The What chant was a blight on pro wrestling. And people had a lot of fun saying it back then when it was still kind of sort of relevant, which it hasn't been in about 15 fucking years. They chanted what after everything Austin said. They chanted what after everything everybody said. It spread like a virus. But you would think after a few years, Austin's gone. The man's retired. They still kept doing it. So now every person who goes out there has to pass the what test. How do you react when people start whatting you? People, I guess there are still people out there who still get a kick out of it. There are people out there who get a kick out of kicking puppies too. But that doesn't make it right. I hate that fucking what chant with every fiber of my being and wish it would die in a fire. And here we are, almost 20 years later. It's not as bad as it used to be where it's every promo every week. It is kind of, I feel like, dying down finally. But it took this long. And it's still around. Probably, you know what, I'll say this. It is the single worst contribution that Stone Cold Steve Austin ever made to the wrestling business. For all the good that this guy did, as big of a draw as he was, as much money as he made everybody, including himself, his single worst contribution to wrestling is that stupid chant. Another reason to hate the Stone Cold heel turn from 2001, which was a shocking WrestleMania match outcome.